Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Classic Comics. So, the release of the Babylon 5 The Road Home animated movie has got me thinking more and more about the Babylon 5 reboot series that Warner Brothers announced back in September of 2021. The show has been repeatedly delayed, first by the sale of Warner Brothers, then the sale of the CW network, where the series was originally supposed to appear, and now we have the writer and actor strikes, which have brought Hollywood to a standstill. Now, this article here on comicbook.com gives us the most recent update on the show's status. Babylon 5 reboot gets new update amid writer's strike. Reports of Babylon 5's death seem to once again have been at least somewhat exaggerated. Following the release of the CW's 2023-2024 schedule, the network confirmed that virtually every project started under prior management had been released to studios. That means basically that they won't be showing up on the CW, but might still be developed elsewhere if the producers wants to give it a try. That left most fans assuming that the planned Babylon 5 reboot was in trouble, especially since the network seems to be focusing on inexpensive, unscripted programs rather than the expensive genre fare that had kept the CW afloat for years. In a fan Q&A, though, TV Line suggested that the project remains in limbo, although all movement, good or bad, had petered out as a result of the ongoing writer's strike, which began in May. This repeats a mantra that has been on creator J. Michael Straczynski's lips for a while now. When there's definitive news, he'll know, and when he knows, he'll let the fans know. Straczynski's Babylon 5 reboot is one project that was still in limbo at the CW and is now, like many things in the biz, on hold amid the WGA strike, TV Line reported. The Babylon 5 reboot is described as a from the ground up reboot and will focus on a character from the original, John Sheridan, an Earth Force officer with a mysterious background assigned to the Babylon 5 station, a 5-mile long space station in neutral space. Sheridan's arrival triggers a destiny beyond anything he could have imagined when an exploratory Earth company accidentally triggers a conflict with a civilization a million years ahead of us. And then here they just talk a bit about the original series. I'm not going to go over that. So the show will have Sheridan from the beginning and not Sinclair, and will involve some kind of conflict with an ancient race of aliens, presumably the Shadows, but the article doesn't actually mention them. Could this alien race be something else? It sounds like the first ones, but maybe not the Shadows. Could it be the Vorlons who are the big threat this time? Or maybe someone else? Perhaps they'll be called shadows, but they'll be significantly different from the shadows we saw in the original series. In any case, while it's a bit up in the air right now, I'm assuming that the reboot will go forward eventually. Allowing for that, what exactly will this reboot look like? After the official announcement was made, JMS went on Twitter, or X, to confirm the reboot was happening, and he made several statements regarding the new series, so let's take a look at those. And this is September 27th, 2021. To answer all the questions, yes, it's true. Babylon 5 is in active development as a series for the CW. We have some serious fans over at the network, and they're eager to see this show happen. I'm hip deep into writing the pilot now, and will be running the series upon pickup. The network understands the uniqueness of Babylon 5 and has given me a great deal of latitude with the storytelling. As noted in the announcement, this is a reboot from the ground up rather than a continuation for several reasons. Heraclitus wrote, "You cannot step in the same river twice, for the river has changed and you have changed. In the years since B5, I've done a ton of other TV shows and movies, adding an equal number of tools to my toolbox, all of which I can bring to bear on one singular question. If I were creating Babylon 5 today for the first time, knowing what I know now as a writer, what would it look like? How would it use all the storytelling tools and technological resources available in 2021 that were not on hand then? How can it be used to reflect the world we live in and the questions we are asking and confronting every day? Fans regularly point out how prescient the show was and is of our current world. It would be fun to take a shot at looking further down the road. So we will not be retelling the same story in the same way because of what Heraclitus said about the river. There would be no fun and no surprises. Better to go the way of Westworld or Battlestar Galactica, where you take the original elements that are evergreen and put them in a blender with a ton of new challenging ideas to create something fresh yet familiar. The original Babylon 5 was ridiculously innovative, the first to use CGI to create ships and characters, and among the very first to shoot widescreen with a 5.1 mix. Most of all, for the first time, Babylon 5 introduced viewers accustomed to episodic television to the concept of a 5-year arc with a pre planned beginning, middle, and end, creating a brand new paradigm for television storytelling that has subsequently become the norm. That tradition for innovation will continue in this new iteration, and I hope to create additional new forms of storytelling that will further push the television medium to the edge of what's possible. Let me conclude by saying just how supportive and enthusiastic everyone at the CW has been and is being with this project. They understand the unique position of Babylon 5, both in television and with its legion of fans, and are doing everything they can to assure the maximum in creative freedom, a new story that will bring in new viewers while honoring all that has come before. So I think it's telling that JMS mentions the Westworld and Battlestar Galactica reboots. The BSG reboot took the basic premise and most of the characters from the original series and presented them in a slightly altered way, with some of the characters being race flipped, gender bent, or simply tweaked in some way. In addition, the BSG reboot was a much darker series than the original, which was a pretty simple, straightforward good versus evil story with clear heroes and villains. The BSG reboot presented the heroes as more flawed, and the show as more morally ambiguous for the most part, with some humans being as bad or worse than the Cylons, and the Cylons themselves being more complex and sympathetic than the original show as well. Given that JMS has specifically cited these shows when talking about the reboot, I think we can assume that the B5 reboot will be similar to those shows in terms of themes and overall tone of the show. Darker, with more flawed characters, and more characters who are morally gray rather than good or evil. Now, yes, you can argue that the original show had some of that already, but there were some pretty clear good guys, such as Sheridan and Sinclair, Ivanova, Franklin, Delenn, Veer, Lanier, for example, in addition to characters who were more gray, like Garibaldi, Londo, or Jakar. In addition, I think we should consider the different circumstances under which this show is likely to be made. The original was aired on broadcast television in first run syndication, much like the Star Trek The Next Generation show and other Star Trek shows of the 90s. It seems likely that this reboot is not going to air on the CW, so given that, it seems likely that the show will end up on Max, Warner Brothers Discovery's streaming service, although I suppose they could license it to another service such as Netflix if they want. This is significant because it means that the series will not be working under the constraints of broadcast television. In other words, the show has leeway to show a lot more graphic violence, more sexual content, more profanity, etc. Will the reboot take that route? Well, that's just the way things are getting made in Hollywood now, it seems. Again, JMS mentioned the Westworld reboot, which is full of graphic violence and sex. The current Star Trek shows also lean into graphic violence and profanity, so I don't think it's a big leap to guess that the B5 reboot will have a darker, harsher feel to it. But what about the overall arc of the show itself? JMS has pretty much said it will not be the same story that we saw before. However, there are certain elements that I think need to be in place, or it just stops being Babylon 5 and just becomes more generic sci fi. Obviously, the setting on Babylon 5, roughly the same situation when the show starts, with the Earth Alliance, Narn, Centauri, Minbari, and Vorlons being the big players in the galaxy. A conflict involving the Shadows or some other elder race for the fate of the galaxy, along with other elements such as the romance between the station commander and Delenn, conflict between the Narn and Centauri, and the Psi Corps manipulating events behind the scenes on Earth. Now, if we go back to this article and try to parse the words, we might get some ideas about what to expect. So, John Sheridan, an Earth Force officer with a mysterious background. A mysterious background is an interesting way to describe Sheridan. After all, Sheridan was a fairly straightforward, heroic good guy, I wouldn't describe him as mysterious. But what if Sheridan has the missing memories, like Sinclair did? Then the description makes more sense. So I'm guessing this is going to be Sheridan, but it'll be a Sheridan that also folds in certain aspects of Sinclair's character as well. It says he's an officer, but it doesn't say that he's a captain specifically. Will he actually command the station, or is he just being assigned there? Will someone else be the station commander, with Sheridan as perhaps a first officer? We can't know for sure with so little information, but I think it's something we should consider as a possibility. An exploratory Earth company triggers a conflict with a civilization a million years ahead of us. Again, is it the Shadows or someone else? It definitely sounds like the first ones, but we don't really know for sure. So, assuming that Sheridan will be the commander of the station and the Shadows are the civilization that is a million years ahead of us, then we can assume that the show's plot, at least to start off, is going to be pretty similar to what was done before. But it's pretty clear that the plot is going to divert from the old show and go in a different direction as the new show's arc unfolds. Given that, what can we expect from the new series in terms of the overall arc? JMS is being pretty tight lipped about what the new show's plot will be, so we can only guess. One thing we can do is look at what JMS's original vision was for Babylon 5, as the show we got actually went through a lot of changes from what JMS originally had planned. So, what was JMS's original plan? The scripts for the Babylon 5 show have been published in a series of books, and the final one in the series included a copy of a memo that JMS wrote around the time after The Gathering had been made and before the TV series had begun production, sometime in 1993. I'm sure this wasn't the original version of the story, but it's the earliest iteration of it that I know of, so that's what I'm going to call it. It seems possible that the reboot could include some of the elements that were abandoned in the original series for various reasons. Now, a few things about the synopsis. This probably isn't what the show would have looked like even if Sinclair had not left the show. There are just too many changes from the story that we got that have nothing to do with Sinclair or Sheridan and probably had more to do with issues surrounding budget or time constraints, other actors leaving the show for various reasons, as well as the uncertain nature of the series, as JMS often didn't know from season to season if the show would even be renewed. Most of the synopsis focuses on much of the big picture rather than individual characters. The only characters mentioned by name are Sinclair, Garibaldi, Delenn, Londo, G'Kar, Kosh, and Catherine Sakai. Aside from Sakai, all those characters were in The Gathering and continued as main characters in the series. I'm guessing this was written at a point when JMS knew that the actors who played Takashima, Dr. Kyle, and Lita were going to be unavailable, and he wasn't sure how the replacement characters would figure into the story or who was going to play them. The president and vice president of Earth are both mentioned, but they're not named. Another character that gets mentioned repeatedly is Sinclair and Delenn's son, but again, he never gets a name. The biggest difference between what we got and JMS's original plan is that he planned for two separate shows. Babylon 5 would have ended on a cliffhanger that led into a spin off series called Babylon Prime, which would have continued the show's overall story arc, and most of the actual Shadow War stuff seems to take place in this second series. The events in the synopsis seem to be in chronological order, more or less, although it's difficult to be sure sometimes, as there's a lot of jumping back and forth between various plot lines. I won't go through the memo word for word, as it would take too long, and besides, most of it is information we already know anyway from the first series. So I'm going to give an abridged version of the major plot elements, particularly the differences from the series that was aired. I'm going to cover this information in 4 parts: seasons 1 and 2, seasons 3 and 4, season 5, and then the Babylon Prime show. Most of the first 2 seasons actually match up with the show that we got, including, among other things, Sinclair dealing with the gap in his memory and his experience during the Battle of the Line, Santiago's assassination and Clark taking power, Babylon Squared story with Babylon 4 mysteriously reappearing, Delenn undergoing her transformation to become human, the Shadows slowly making their presence felt, Londo allying with them, and Londo using them to gain influence with the Centauri government, and Kosh revealing himself when he saves Sinclair's life at the end of Season 2. Now, here are the main differences from what was aired. Obviously, the big difference is Sinclair never leaves. He stays on and remains commander of the station throughout the series. It's unclear exactly when this is revealed, but the big secret behind Sinclair in the Battle of Line is not that he becomes Valen. In fact, Valen is never mentioned in this outline. It is revealed that Sinclair is in fact a person who, according to an ancient prophecy, will save the Minbari from dying off. In order to fulfill this prophecy, Delenn must transform to become human and mate with Sinclair. Their son will become a chosen one who will save the Minbari race from extinction. Some of the Minbari, presumably the warrior caste, don't agree with this interpretation of the prophecy and think that Sinclair will instead lead the Minbari to their doom. It seems like the Centauri conquest of the Narn homeworld doesn't happen until around the middle of Season 3. In fact, it's not really clear if there is an actual Narn Centauri war as such, like we saw in the original series. The Shadows aid Londo's ascension to power by secretly staging a number of incidents, but the synopsis doesn't say if this involves a full-blown Narn Centauri war that lasts for most of a season. Rather, sometime by the middle of Season 3, the Shadows help the Centauri conquer the Narn homeworld and decapitate their empire, but it's not clear if this is the culmination of a lengthy war. The Centauri conquer the Narn with the help of the Shadows. After the Narn surrender, G'Kar briefly stays on B5 and tries to rally allies against the Centauri, but his efforts fail. He then returns to the Narn homeworld to join the resistance against the Centauri occupation. Catherine Sakai has her mind violated in some way. It isn't clear exactly how, and all of her memories, including her relationship with Sinclair, are erased. Although it doesn't say so, the impression I get here is that she's left as a kind of mindless shell after this, and Sinclair is heartbroken. Obviously, this seems like some sort of early version of the Anna Sheridan Zaha Doom storyline, but there's no clear indication of how this happens to her or who's responsible. However, if it's not the Shadows, then who else could it be? The Psi Corps seem like the only other likely suspects, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume it was the Shadows who are responsible. Sinclair and Delenn become romantically involved, and by the end of Season 4, Delenn is pregnant. Garibaldi falls off the wagon and starts drinking again, and eventually he resigns as chief of security. By Season 4, he's operating out of B5 as some sort of mercenary or freelancer, but there's no mention of Bester or the Psi Corps or the whole sleeper agent William Edgar's telepath virus story. There is no mention of an actual open war between the Shadows and the Vorlons. Rather, they are manipulating the younger races in order to further their agendas. There's no mention of the whole order versus chaos conflict between the two, or the Shadows' survival of the fittest ethos. Just that the Vorlons have been manipulating the younger races throughout history, and the Shadows are rebelling against that and trying to set themselves up as rulers of the galaxy. Since this video is running long, I'm going to split this up into two parts. I hope to have part 2 ready in a few days. Until then, let me know what you think about the differences between this original plan that JMS had and the story we wound up getting in the comments. And also please like this video and sub to the channel. And while you're here, please check out some of my other videos, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.